Welcome to the second half of the day. Hopefully you're all woken up after lunch, but I wanted to talk about semantics in publishing and media, but specifically in publishing. We've heard a lot about smart content today and what makes content smart, and that's what I guess I want to talk about, how that applies for publishers. So a little bit about me. I'm a content strategy lead at Razorfish. I'm a member of our media and entertainment practice in New York. Especially, we have a lot of publishing clients, media and entertainment clients. I've worked in publishing before I was at Razorfish. And as Seth mentioned, I am the author of a report called Nimble, which was published by Razorfish earlier this year. The Razorfish, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, it's a consulting company. Here are some of the projects that we've done recently. We work primarily in the digital space. I'm having a little bit of throat issue today, so hopefully it'll hold out. So we set out for this report to ask a question for our publishing customers, which is, we know that a lot of them are facing some challenges as they move into the digital realm. How are some of the emerging technologies that many of the things that you've heard about today can help some of those, face some of those challenges of that transition? What we found is that content needs to be free. So, this is maybe a controversial way of stating it more so than it really is. I'm not saying that content, has to be given away, but content needs to be able to go where it needs to go, be consumed by people wherever and whenever they want to. This is something, again, we're hearing over and over today. The main reason, as many of you are familiar with, why this is becoming an issue now as we move into digital, is that content is no longer constrained by the containers of a magazine, a newspaper, a CD, etc. So, you have your article. BBC is actually an interesting case, I think, because they're a media company that's been around for a long time, but they never did print media. So when they go into text journalism, they went directly to the web, and they didn't have to ever work out all of the workflow and production process of publishing a print publication. So here's an article on the web, but it's also appearing in many other channels, platforms, devices, all these places where people are now looking at the same article. So it's not just the website that they control where these things are appearing. There's an email. People are emailing it to each other. How many of these are there? Okay. So we looked at kind of three areas of challenge and opportunity for publishers. Monetization is obviously a big one. It costs money to produce content. How do you continue to be profitable while doing that? Especially in the digital realm where people are starting to, have the assumption that they can access everything for free. Engagement is an issue for publishers because there's so many different things that are competing for your viewers' attention. And then delivery, because of what I mentioned, that you're now, sending your content not just to your website, but to all these different devices and channels where people are consuming it. But it's not just about these three things. What we found when we talked to the people who are dealing with some of these issues, it's really about, sort of a business transformation for the publishing industry. You can't just kind of take these individual issues and plug in a solution here and there. It's really rethinking how they approach content. So one of the ways that we think that content, it's sort of counterintuitive perhaps, can become more free, more nimble, is through structure. So this is kind of a big catchphrase of the report: structure sets content free. And what do I mean by structure? So structured data, for one. We talk about markup that adds not just HTML and RSS feeds and things like that, but markup within the content that adds more meaning and context. So it allows you to separate it from the mechanism of delivery, but gives context, give meaning about what that content is and how it should be used. So here's a kind of example of an ad hoc structure. Some people may be familiar with microformats. Don't worry, I'm not going to show a lot of code. I just want to for demonstration, this one. These are a sort of way you can embed some code in a piece of content that, assuming the system you're sending it to understands those same things, it understands, okay, this is the location, this is an event, etc. But there are some industry standards that are emerging that are less ad hoc, and the benefit of some of these is that these are ways of adding more structure to the content that can be embedded in the content as you publish it, as you send it out to various places. And because they're industry standard, there are tools that understand what that markup means. So how do you get that markup in there? Well, there are semantic publishing tools. So these are kind of, we're familiar with content management systems, and there are content management systems that will automatically embed that code in there so that you don't have to, your content producers don't have to be thinking about, typing that stuff in. It just knows, okay, these are cities, these are facts, these are organizations, etc., and it wraps those in the meaningful code. Some of these have machine-assisted tagging built in. So the examples I'm showing you here are just one example. There are many others. But this is you've heard several people talking today about sort of concept extraction and machine-assisted tagging. It basically extracts the key concepts from an article, from a piece of content, and makes suggestions. So, it lets the editor then say yes, no, for each of those concepts. And then there's semantic SEO tools. So you may have seen like this example over in the left-hand side that a lot of search engines are now kind of displaying more information right in the search results, more useful information. So you look up the name of a restaurant and it's going to tell you some ratings, the address, phone number, reviews, etc., right in the search results. This is accomplished using the kind of markup that I was talking about. And there are tools that are designed specifically for adding that markup so that it will enhance the, rather than just regular SEO, it enhances this kind of advanced search results. What you're seeing up here is like, on the left is what a person sees, on the right is what a search engine would see. So there's all this additional markup that's kind of wrapping the context around the person's name, the organization name. So unique IDs is another key aspect of structured data. I think that you can get away without these, but it's very useful to be able to say, definitively identify who or what you're talking about. So in the case of Bill Clinton, if you say Bill Clinton, someone else says President William Jefferson Clinton, you want to know that you're talking about the same person. In the case of President Bush, you want to know that, we're making a distinction between two different people. So by assigning each person, place, or thing that you talk about its own unique ID, then you can disambiguate and you can make those connections. And of course, you don't have to come up with these yourself. There are standards that exist already, and there's, can you see that? This is the linked data movement, I guess you could say. So the open linked data community is about basically saying, yes, we know there are these industry standards for structuring data, but if your company has valuable data, just put it out there, share it. We'll find a way to understand it and link to it. So this is a diagram. Actually, this is a year old, showing all of these different data sets that are published, publicly published, and the connections between them. So what happens is that they serve sort of as a translation for each other. If you understand the IDs in DBpedia, you can then link to these other sources and understand the translation between them.
Do you have some opera here in New York?
So when I say, unique ID, it doesn't mean you have to invent a unique ID. You may be able to go to one of these sources and say, okay, I'm going to use these identifiers for the people that I talk about, and these identifiers for the companies, these identifiers for the locations, etc. But it helps provide some assurance that you're talking about the same Georgia, for example, that somebody else is talking about. Once you have that, there are these rich data services. So this is an example from Wall Street Journal, where they used Freebase, which has sort of changed their business model a little bit after they were bought by Google, but they, over on the right, you can see, perhaps you can see, this is a movie review, and they've said basically, here are the movies that are mentioned in this review, and here are the actors and the directors and things that are associated with that movie, and all of that data is being pulled in from this rich data source that has all those relationships. So Wall Street Journal basically just has to have their ID linked to the movie ID in Freebase, and it pulls in all of that data. It links back to pages on Freebase so you could get more information, but it also links to other, related reviews within the Wall Street Journal system. Once you have these sort of unique IDs set up, you can create this kind of landing page or hub page, or in some way having kind of one page for each concept, which is the place where that concept lives in your system. It doesn't mean you can't have additional content about it, but having a single point of, this is the page about the band, The Police. And this ends up having, helping, it has high SEO value because everything in your system points back to that page. It also can serve a useful service for your readers because then it aggregates all the content about that one topic, and you can again map it to related data using these rich data services, so you can link off to other sources of information. So here's another example. These are on BBC Music, and you can see this is a very long page. It links to other sites like Wikipedia, IMDb, Last.fm, MySpace. It shows all the latest news about that artist, that it came from various places on the BBC. And I like this one. It even tells you how often that particular artist has been played on all of the different BBC radio properties. So these related content services, there are some that kind of automate that sort of functionality, where it would, again, sort of read through the content, extract the key concepts, and automatically add videos or related blog posts or other content from around the web. So, and things that you can more or less tune them. So here's an article about buying an iPad, and there are popular blog posts and videos related to that. APIs are, interesting. We think of them as kind of, we use APIs to get information from other sources, but it's a two-way street. So, also, again, in that sort of linked data mindset, if you have data and content that you think might be useful to other people or useful in partnerships with other organizations, creating APIs so that those can be consumed is just as important as being able to consume APIs of other people's data and services. And then, kind of looking forward, we really, some of this is a little bit future looking, some of it exists now, but being able to use this kind of markup to express things beyond just layout, beyond just, tagging and things like that, being able to define how things should be used, trust the value of content, entitlements of content, and versioning. A lot of this are things where standards are still emerging, but it's, I think, a rich area, especially for publishers. They're going to be looking for this kind of markup to use. So if you are starting that IPO, maybe develop one of these. So what does this nimble world look like once you have this nimble content? Well, we see that publishers are, again, struggling with monetization of their content. Advertising is not doing as well online as it was in traditional media. Traditional media is not doing as well as it was. We think that there's a need to kind of develop like a portfolio of content, of revenue, not just rely on one single approach. So a lot of people are very interested in paid content, and the question is, how do you get people to pay for your content? And I think that it's not about just saying like, this content is valuable, people should pay for it, but it's about creating new products, creating new experiences that are going to be offering something new and different to your audience, but within the same confines of meeting their needs and their expectations. So things that are appropriate to the brand. I think that Major League Baseball is an interesting example of that. They have kind of a freemium model where they provide some content for free, and especially in the mobile space, there are things, so they'll provide some level of content for free, but if you want more, once you get kind of sucked into it, there's other things that you can subscribe to for a year or for, on a case-by-case basis, and get additional content products, additional level of involvement with their content through that service. So it's about providing that new product and new experience with a lot of the same content that you're already creating. Advertising, I think the projections are, although online digital advertising has not performed as well, has not come to like fill in the gap that people are spending less on traditional media, and they're not filling that gap with digital, but the projections are that it's going to increase. And I think the responsibility for publishers, the thing that they need to do is help build the impression that their inventory is valuable. I think that there's kind of an impression right now that from advertisers that online inventory is not as valuable as offline inventory. So there's a little bit of work there to be done to kind of prove them wrong. And I think a lot of it comes down to using the content in more interesting ways with the advertising. So this is an example from New York Times where AMC wanted to put a Mad Men ad, and it's a rich media ad, and it has like profiles and videos and things like that. But it also uses content from the New York Times archive, where they had covered Mad Men from, everything from the style section to the business section to entertainment section. And so they were able to incorporate that archived content into the ad and create a new kind of partnership. I think, we've talked a little bit here about contextual ads and targeted ads. This is a fairly broad example. Okay, you're looking at the travel section, you see ads for travel, but there are more subtle approaches. So I like this one. You are looking for content about the World Cup, and it says, well, if you like the World Cup, maybe you also like travel. And they even went so far as to have this ad. I don't know if you can see it, but it says, you know what we do with old planes? Give them the red card. So they're even kind of using that kind of humor, referencing the World Cup in the advertisement itself. And then there's a danger, I guess, with contextual ads, and people have mentioned this too. If you have just matching off of a keyword, and there's an article about Olive Garden, and there's an ad about Olive Garden, but it's about people getting sick, that's not great for your brand. And so, a lot of semantic ad targeting tools, they can help protect the brand by also doing some kind of sentiment analysis along with the topics. Oh, oops, there. So in addition to paying for content and advertising on content, there's some other business models that I think are interesting. This is a diagram by my friend Scott Brinker, who calls himself a chief marketing technologist, which is, I think, in a role that he invented, but it's very interesting. But these are business models that he talked about for linked data, and I think a few of them are particularly interesting for publishers. There's some product development models where you can partner with people who are developing products, and you could, they may have a product in mind, they don't have the content, you have the content, but you don't have the resources to develop a new product. You can partner with people and do either a either a licensing model where they pay a flat fee to use your content, or more of like a marketplace model where you give them the content and then you share in the revenue from the product that they develop with it. Affiliate programs are not new. We certainly have links to, rent this movie or buy tickets to the show or whatever. But I think that with semantic technology, with semantic markup and tagging, you have a much greater accuracy and being able to match those affiliates without having to do a lot of manual, placing of tags. And then the sort of value add is an interesting model that I don't think we have approached or have looked at enough in publishing. You see this kind of in the game industry, but this is where you give away some content for free, and then that leads towards people paying for, premium services or devices or other premium content. And then I think one of the key ones that's not mentioned here is the old, standby of saving money. So people have mentioned a couple of times in some of the lightning talks, things that can save time, things that can be done faster. And so, a lot of publishers are working now with smaller staff, trying to do more with less. And, some of these tools can help create efficiencies that will reduce costs. So now going back to the issue of engagement, how do you find your audience? How do you connect up with your audience? There's a lot of different places where their attention is being split. And, I think the semantic SEO is one thing. We know that the SEO is kind of like, you almost have to do it now. Whether or not you feel like it's really going to give you an advantage, if you don't do it, you are at a disadvantage. Semantic SEO can kind of give you another boost in that. But I think the other big piece of it is social. And, other people have mentioned this as well. This is a quote I like from Martin Eisenholz that, you can't just put your content in an old portal model. You have to make it possible for it to play in the social space. So this was an example. I think they've actually fixed this now, but where I saved this video to Facebook and it says video from tv.com. And that's not very specific. Nobody's going to click on that. It just has a generic image, a generic title. No one's going to click on it without having some sort of compelling, interesting title, or at least letting someone know what that is. So I think if you're asking your audience to participate and to help spread your content through social means, you have a responsibility to kind of mark it up and tag it up so that once it's out there, it still has context, it's still meaningful. And then, about becoming a content distributor. So you have to think about delivering to all these different channels and platforms and devices. I think, people need to be out there kind of looking at where their content is appearing, how it's appearing. We have, in 2010, the iPad came out and everybody's scrambling to how do I make an iPad app? And then next year it's going to be, gestural interfaces. So how do I make an app for my, gestural wall? And then maybe in 2016, people will be creating content for their holodeck. But it's always a scramble. So the question is how do we get our content in good enough shape so that we can anticipate developing new products for platforms that don't even exist yet? And then I think the key part of this is the role of the editor is changing. And a number of people have mentioned curation today. And I, too, like to say, the editor is going to become a curator. But I think it's really even more than that. So the editor certainly needs to be thinking about their content over a much longer lifespan, thinking about archived content, thinking about ongoing stories, how to take that old content and put it into new context to help tell current stories. But it's also about managing all these partnerships and relationships that I've been talking about, and managing this multi-delivery channel and the new product development. So the editor has to wear a lot more hats than they ever had to wear before. And I think one of the things that can help them, there are advanced media monitoring tools which incorporate semantics, which can help track how are people talking about story, how is the story developing over time, how are people responding to our coverage of that story. Okay, so in conclusion, and I know I rushed through some of this because we have a sort of short time, but there's a lot more references and specific examples in the report, and I'll give you the URL at the end. But I think that successful publishers, will need to understand their relationship with their audience in order to harness that and use that to develop in new directions. They also need to understand that people are going to consume their content in a wide variety of places, times, circumstances, and they need to accommodate that and think about that. And of course, I think one of the reasons that we're all here is thinking about investing in the emerging technologies so that, the ones that align with their business strategies. So the full report can be read at nimble.razorfish.com. It's available for free. We have a Twitter account. And if you want to talk to someone at Razorfish more about our media and entertainment group, you can talk to Eric Moore. I think, oh, I didn't have my info on there, but I also wanted to say, I mentioned at the beginning I'm a content strategy lead. I don't know if people out here are really familiar with that field, but many of you who are here who are interested in content, you may not realize that you're already content strategists. So if you think you might be a content strategist, feel free to talk to me about it, and I'll let you know if I think you are. So, yes. So if anyone has questions, I think we have some time.
Hi, I was very interested in this idea of ongoing stories. I hear this concept, in multiple places, but how does one define an ongoing story as opposed to something that branched off? And what maybe are some of the concepts and the tools around defining it, tracking it, deciding how to
Right.
branch it off, and maybe an ongoing story in one context would be separate or even unrelated stories in another context.
Right. Well, I mean, I think there are stories that are more obviously ongoing stories. So take the miners that were just freed from Chile. So they, this was a story that lasted several months, and it had more or less coverage at different times. That's pretty clearly an ongoing story.
Machine.
Well,
I'm thinking from the point of view of a machine or semi-automated system, how do you, what are the tools, how you deal with it?
And I don't know that this is something that can be done entirely automated from the point of view merely of machines. And I think this is where, that role of the editor as a curator comes in. But certainly through tagging is a key part of it. There was an experiment by Google at the beginning of this year. They worked with the New York Times and the Washington Post and a few other publications, I believe, to create something called living stories. And I think it's not still happening, but you can see some of the test cases of this still on the web. But they would have an ongoing story that was certainly broader, like something like healthcare reform. And again, that would be something that would be even more ambiguous. But I think that was done partly through tagging and partly through curation. And I don't think that I think this is where things like those media monitoring tools can come in, but these are all tools that I think help editors, and as several people have mentioned, in reference to like CRM, it's not about making it 100% automated. It's about giving people more information so that, if we are feeling information overload, certainly reporters are feeling the same thing. So how do they find the key pieces of information? How do they find the new developments? How do the editors sift through their entire archive of content? So, I think that these tools that do analytics and that do sort of concept extraction and semantic matching are tools that we should think of as helping editors to do their job, helping researchers, and helping journalists, in the case of publishing, but certainly in other industries as well, not necessarily doing it 100% themselves, helping a call desk in the case of the CRM. Okay. Any other questions? I don't know who.
What kinds of repositories you're using for the RDF and the OWL data, and what you've actually seen being used in customer deployments?
So I haven't. At Time Inc., we had built our own repository, and I think we were using. We kind of like built it on top of a relational database. I don't want to get too wonky for those people who are, aren't that into it, but. After I left, I think they were using Jenna and various like open source tools. I think after I left, they were considering switching to more RDF native kind of repository. But I think what I'm finding and sort of the focus of this report is that a lot of people are not necessarily or a lot of organizations are not necessarily ready to go like, we're going to switch over our entire data repository and migrate everything into a new system and et cetera, et cetera. So, the focus, at least of this report, has been how can you take bits and pieces of that and tools that are useful without necessarily overhauling your entire system. That being said, I'm not like a deep technologist, so I don't know if I'm necessarily the right person to fully answer your question. But I think we're looking more at a little semantics goes a long way kind of solutions at this stage. Okay.